Good morning. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar on sustainability in the U.S. tire and rubber industry. My name is Kel Mahoney. I'm the Director of Suppliers Partnership for the Environment, and I will be the moderator for today's webinar. Before we get started, just a couple quick logistical items. So first, all attendees are muted for this webinar. We'd ask if you have questions for the speakers to please use the Q&A window at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We should have about 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A after the presentations conclude this morning. So please do enter your questions and we'll get to as many as time allows. Also want to note that this webinar is being recorded, so you can expect to see a copy of that recording along with the slide deck in your inbox in the next few days here. So, before we get into the content today, just a quick introduction of SP and sort of the context for this discussion. So Suppliers Partnership for the Environment is an industry coalition bringing automakers and their suppliers together to collaborate on environmental sustainability goals. As we look to the future, to the 2030 and beyond period, what we're seeing within our membership is our members setting really ambitious long-term targets, looking at things like carbon neutrality, circularity, sustainable materials management. And as we look to those long-term targets, one of the things that we see is that really no company can do this alone. It takes collaboration, it takes partnership, and it takes engagement up and down the value chain. And that's really why SP exists. But the other thing I'd add to that is, I would say that as we look to those long-term goals and the challenges that are in front of us, no one industry can really do this alone either. And so what we hope to see and what we hope to promote is, communication across industries and ideally, proactive collaboration. And that's why we're here today. So in recent months, SP has been doing a series of deep dives looking at particularly industries that work with the automotive sector, such as the steel industry, the aluminum industry. And today, we're very pleased to start a dialogue with the U.S. tire and rubber industry, looking at some of the sustainability priorities for the industry, some of the programs that they're working on, and beginning to think through potential opportunities for alignment and collaboration as we move forward. So with that, I'd like to introduce our speakers for this morning. So first up, we have John Sheeran, who is the Director of End-of-Life Tires for the U.S. Tire and Rubber Manufacturers Association. John will speak about USTMA's sustainability vision and some of the work that their members are doing in this area. We'll then hear from Laure Gerbert and Bridget Chauvin with Michelin, who will talk to Michelin's sustainability ambitions from a technical perspective and highlight some of the programs that their team is working on to support those ambitions in the near term. So with that, I'd like to turn over to John Sheeran with USTMA. And John, you can take it away whenever you're ready.
Well, good morning. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, great. Let's just go right into our next slide. We're going to talk about sustainability priorities and progress from the viewpoint of the U.S. Tire Manufacturers Association. And let me tell you a little bit about ourselves. Our mission is to strengthen the competitiveness, societal impact, and reputation of the U.S. tire manufacturing industry. Our vision is to be the premier advocate for the U.S. tire manufacturing industry, advancing safe, sustainable mobility for the future. And our brand identity relates to safety through innovation, economic value, and sustainability. And we are the trade association, next slide, of the 12 companies that manufacture on-the-road tires here in the United States. And these are all of our full corporate members. Goodyear, of course, acquired Cooper not that long ago. So we went from 13 down to 12. And there's a second set of members who are involved in our data programs. On our next slide, basic sustainability is the spot to begin. And of course, we recognize the three core pillars of sustainability: safety, environmental, economic. From a safety perspective, there's a couple things going on in the tire industry. We're very interested in promoting tire safety because tires are all about safety. And secondly, under safety, we are advancing worker safety. So from a sustainability perspective, under safety, we're looking at both, when we look at materiality, what's most important to the industry, advancing worker safety, and promoting tire safety. When we move to the second pillar, the environment, we're going to be talking about a whole variety of things. So let's just set that one aside for a second. And then our economic impact. This is a major industry. Tires are a major industry in the US, supporting more than 250,000 jobs and that total over $20 billion in wages every year. So it's a very significant industry to the United States. Okay, on our next slide, this is why I held sustainability, I'm sorry, this is why I held environment back for a second. Because under environment, there's a series of visions that we have that I want to mention, and then two of them that I want to dive into very deeply. The first one speaks to improving the longevity and performance of the tires that we design, make, and sell. I would say rolling resistance is critically important there. We'll talk about that again. Second vision, zero workplace injuries and illnesses. Third vision, increasing the use of sustainable materials in the tires we sell. And that will tie into our CO2 vision. We will take a deeper dive into our CO2 vision. USTMA members strive to reduce greenhouse gases throughout a tire's life cycle. Fifthly, USTMA members are committed to understanding our product's impact. And that's a continuing journey. We are regularly getting new questions about our products, and new science opens doors that ask new questions. And I think that's going to continue for a long, long time. And then lastly, we have our goal, all our members share a goal that all scrap tires enter sustainable end-use markets. Okay, so on our next slide, we're going to dive into CO2, into this, the CO2 vision, where we are striving to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions throughout a tire's life cycle. And taking a quick industry snapshot in this graph, we can see that tires are very small when compared to a number of other industries. I'm not saying they're insignificant, but they are really small compared to many other industries. Tire manufacturing is a low energy intensity, but highly trade sensitive industry. And like I said, we use less electricity and produce less CO2 emissions from our manufacturing plants than many other manufacturing sectors. On our next slide, we see that we can make a lot of progress in reducing scope 2 CO2 or scope 3 CO2 emissions from our products. And the tire performance, that's the greatest opportunity to reduce CO2 emissions. More than 80% of tire-related CO2 emissions are linked to vehicle fuel consumption. And we've worked long with the federal government to promote fuel-efficient tires, and we offer a wider selection of products with improved rolling efficiency, so less energy is required to move a vehicle down the road. A 1 to 2% increase in the fuel efficiency of a passenger and light truck tire on cars, thanks to improved rolling efficiency, could save up to 2 billion gallons of fuel per year. That's enough to power 1.5 million homes and 1.9 million passenger cars per year. That number used to be 90% when we would present on this, but now it's 80%, more than 80%. And that may be in part because of improvements in rolling resistance. The more we improve it, the less percent of the CO2 emissions will be linked to tires. Then lastly, on this slide, more than half of our members have now set numeric goals for improved rolling efficiency. And Michelin is an excellent example, not to steal their thunder, but they have a published objective of increasing the energy efficiency of their products by 10% by 2030 compared to 2020. with a 0.5% increase in 2021. So that's just one example of these numeric goals that our members have for reducing rolling efficiency. Looking further at climate change, on our next slide, renewable and recycled feedstocks also help reduce life cycle CO2. And the Sustainable Natural Rubber Platform was created to look at using recycled and plant-based, let me rephrase. The Sustainable Natural Rubber Platform was established to make sure that the natural rubber coming into tire production is sustainable. And there's a website on that platform. There's a whole lot of information out there. Sustainable natural rubber was, of course, the primary ingredient for rubber tires for many years. It's still a very major ingredient. Synthetic rubber composes a major portion of some tires, like passenger tires, less in bigger tires. But the Sustainable Natural Rubber Platform is looking at avoiding CO2 emissions associated with producing those virgin feedstocks and advancing a sustainable and circular scrap tire value chain. Also, manufacturing retreaded tires reduces CO2 emissions and helps foster the circular economy. In our second box in the middle, plant-based rubber alternatives that can be grown closer to manufacturing facilities, such as Waiuli and dandelions, could also reduce CO2 emissions associated with the transport of natural rubber, which is primarily produced in Southeast Asia. Next, using rice husks as replacement for silica, where appropriate, reduces CO2 emissions related to silica production, which traditionally depend on fossil fuels. Other renewable additives, such as soybean and orange peel oil, already in limited use, could increase the biogenic fraction of end-of-life tires used as tire-derived fuel, which is recognized in many jurisdictions as a carbon-neutral energy source. The 24% natural rubber content of tire-derived fuel is recognized by the US EPA as carbon neutral because it's a natural source. And this helps support a circular and low carbon manufacturing economy. We have a host of members actively researching and utilizing feedstocks such as carbon black and micronized rubber powder from end-of-life tires. And using recycled materials in tires avoids the CO2 emissions with producing virgin feedstocks and advances sustainable and circular scrap tire value chain. Additional, and I mentioned retreads. So our manufacturers are bringing both more renewable materials and more recyclable materials into our product. And typically there's goals to make 100% sustainable tires. Still continuing on climate change for just a minute. I mentioned that the total emissions of CO2 related to tire manufacturing has gone down. In this chart, we show it went down 15% from 2010 to 2019. And much of this was due to improvements in the US electricity grid, but tire manufacturers are also doing their part. More than half the energy used at member facilities comes from natural gas. In addition, members are implementing a variety of strategies and technologies to improve the energy efficiency of our operations and reduce CO2 emissions. And this includes solar installations. On our next slide, Bridgestone's facility in Aiken County, South Carolina, installed an 8-acre array of solar panels. Continental reduced electricity demand by installing LED lighting and motion sensors. These types of energy reduction approaches are standard across our industry. I don't want to dive too far into Michelin's efforts, but it includes a focus on increasing efficient transport and taking an intermodal approach. So for example, some products now shipped between Canada and the US will go by boat instead of by road, which will reduce fuel consumption. So at this point, I'd like to slide over into the second vision that I wanted to take more of a deep dive into, which is end-of-life tires. Our members, USTMA members, have the goal that all scrap tires enter sustainable and circular end-use markets. Unfortunately, the growth in scrap tire generation outpaced the recycling of scrap tires in 2019 as markets remained essentially flat, and thus the percent of tires going to recycling markets went down in 2019. On our next slide, this link here at the top goes to our USTMA scrap tire management report. And as I mentioned, scrap tire markets are not keeping pace with annual generation. In 2019, we were at 76% of end-of-life tires going into an end-use market. That's down from the peak of 96% in 2013. This is primarily due to a loss of certain tire-derived fuel markets, primarily due to low-cost natural gas and changes in the energy sector. The recycling markets, taking tires and making new tire products or other products out of them, has been really rather consistent over this time period. But this highlights the fact that we need to keep growing markets. We need new, more sustainable, more circular markets to manage the continuing increasing flow of scrap tires that are generated each year. 7% was one recent estimate for scrap tire growth. And this is a priority. As I said, growing sustainable and circular markets for scrap tires is a priority. Tires remain one of the most recycled and reclaimed products in the US. Since 1990, through the combined efforts of USTMA, state and federal regulators, recyclers, and other stakeholders, 94% of the stock tires that were stockpiled in the US have been eliminated. That was a major problem. The US EPA had estimated that over 1 billion scrap tires were in stockpiles across the US in 1990. That's around 56 million as estimated in 2019. So the historical problem of large stockpiles of scrap tires and fires is being addressed, and we're at 94% in terms of getting that eliminated in 2019. And we expect further progress in the 2021 US Scrap Tire Management Report. This particular slide shows the amount to market, amount generated, and percentage over the course of the last 10 years. And we can see the peak in 2013 when energy prices were very high. And now we see a bit of a trough down to 75.8% going into end-use markets. But if you look at that green bar, total to market between 17 and 19, pretty much the same number. In the next slide, which is a stacked bar chart, shows the same thing, breaking down those markets into tire-derived fuel, ground rubber, civil engineering, export, and the like. Those are the big four, by the way. Tire-derived fuel has historically, and you can see in the blue, it's historically been the major market for scrap tires in the US, but we have a strong and in 2019 growing ground rubber market. Civil engineering goes up and down depending on how many big projects, oftentimes states or landfill companies are doing, and exported bounces around. You can see how it's dropped down as compared to 2013 or 2011. It's gone down by almost a factor of 2.5. Moving on, partnerships are the proven road to success in our next slide when we deal with scrap tires. USTMA is working with other stakeholders on multiple fronts to encourage the growth of circular and sustainable markets for scrap tires. Our next slide, please. There we go. We're advocating for the proper funding of state scrap tire programs. For example, California charges $1.75 on the purchase of every new tire that goes to the state. And some of that money has been used for research that is helping to grow their markets, some of it to clean up old stockpiles, some of it to track and manage scrap tires, but they do have a strong research and market development component to their program in California, and we advocate for that in other states. We're also raising awareness for public and private investments in research and innovation. For example, we conducted a state of knowledge report on rubber modified asphalt in partnership with the Ray and the University of Missouri, which was very well received. And this state of knowledge on rubber modified asphalt summarizes all the latest information, the benefits of the product to the performance and to the environment. We also have been advocating for federal sustainable infrastructure legislation and raising awareness at the federal and state level for the promising benefits of rubber modified asphalt. We continue to support innovation in the industry for recycled carbon black. And we're working to inform EPA's advance notice of proposed rulemaking regarding emissions from pyrolysis facilities. Just jumping back to infrastructure for 1 second, of course, well, I think I'll touch on that. Let's go to our next slide, where we get to our state of knowledge. Like I said, it was conducted by the University of Missouri in partnership with USTMA and the Ray. Its purpose was to better understand the potential obstacles to wider use of rubber modified asphalt. We collaborated with the Ray, which is a philanthropic organization dedicated to the discovery and implementation of sustainable transportation technologies. And we collaborated with researchers at the University of Missouri-Columbia to produce this state of knowledge report on rubber modified asphalt, which we published a year ago. It identifies the knowledge gaps and offers recommendations for future research and investment based on a study of those scholarly articles and reports going back to the early 1960s and a new survey of 26 US state highway agencies. On our next slide, this state of knowledge report focused on the performance benefits, the economic benefits, and the environmental benefits of rubber modified asphalt. The overarching research shows that rubber modified asphalt extends pavement life, reduces rutting and cracking, and it significantly mitigates noise from traffic and enhances ride quality and safety. A state like Michigan is doing a lot of work on rubber modified asphalt. They've had over 40 different projects laid. They put down 100 miles of chip seal last year. And this rubber modified asphalt is going to be a very significant future market for ground tire rubber. It's been difficult to open up this market because every state is different and every state has its own standards and specifications relating to asphalt, oftentimes not even contemplating a mix additive like rubber. But when we think about where scrap tires should be going, this is an excellent, sustainable, and circular end use for scrap tires, because when that rubber modified asphalt reaches the end of its useful life and they strip that road up, it can be reused back as reclaimed asphalt pavement. There's economic benefits to rubber modified asphalt. It's shown to be a cost-effective option because it increases the service life of the pavement and reduces or delays the requirements for maintenance. It leads to significant cost savings when evaluated using life cycle cost analysis techniques. Rubber modified asphalt is less expensive than polymer modified asphalt on the initial install today, and it's competitive with hot mix asphalts. When we look at the environmental benefits, rubber modified asphalt utilization results in the reduction of CO2 emissions and lower energy consumption over the lifetime of a pavement. And since RMA pavements are stiffer and smoother, they reduce the generation of tire wear particles and improve water quality in roadway runoff. On our second to last slide, I'm going to touch on pyrolysis. Pyrolysis of scrap tires, or the heating of scrap tire material in the absence of oxygen, yields a recycled carbon black through certain processes, which can be used to reinforce and manage heat in a tire. Reclaimed carbon black produces 81% less CO2 per ton compared to virgin carbon black. And our members are using recycled carbon black to produce new tires right now. And I've given 3 quick examples right here. And I would further add that Michelin is involved in a partnership in Europe called Black Cycle, which looks to increase reclaimed carbon black utilization. I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. And alternatively, Bridgestone is partnering with a company called LanzaTech to pursue end-of-life recycling technologies, looking at a biological pathway. Tires have typically been recycled mechanically. Sometimes they've been combusted as a tire-derived fuel, but typically they're mechanically reduced to a 2-inch chip to make a tire-derived fuel. Now we're seeing advanced or chemical recycling technologies coming to the fore, like pyrolysis or gasification. And further down the road, there may be actual biological pathways to recycle scrap tires. And with that, I would like to thank you for your time. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today and look forward to your questions.
Excellent. Thank you so much, John. So there's a couple questions here that I'd like to take and before we move on to Michelin. So, one, following up on what you were just speaking on the scrap tires, there's a question here about the opportunity for those scrap tires to be recycled content input back into automotive products. Has USTMA studied the use of micronized rubber powder or other similar materials back into the automotive industry?
Yes, and ground tire rubber or micronized powder is today being used in new automotive products. And if you go company by company, you can typically find a series of products at each automotive company that is using some amount or some form of ground tire rubber in some products. I'm thinking right now of gaskets and other rubber type products. There's an insulating blanket that was put over lithium batteries in an electric car, as I recall. There's a wide variety of uses, and we've been eager to put together a webinar to really take a deep dive into that. We've heard resistance in some respects to the use of a plastic rubber blend that can be used to form automotive parts due to potential weight issues. A very reasonable consideration. But there's many other types of parts of a car where a recycled rubber material like a micronized rubber powder could be optimal. So yeah, we'd like to spend a lot more time with some of the key stakeholders in the value chain to really take a deep dive on that.
Thanks, John. I think that's something we'd certainly be interested in continuing a conversation on as well. Maybe if I can ask one more before we move on to Michelin, there's a couple questions coming in about 6 ppd, and I know you mentioned the study on asphalt and runoff, but could you speak maybe at a high level to how USTMA is looking at that issue?
I can. We are supporting research into 6 ppd and 6 ppd quinone. 6 ppd is an antioxidant and anti-ozonant that helps prevent degradation and cracking of rubber compounds caused by exposure to oxygen and ozone and temperature fluctuations. 6 ppd quinone is not used in tire manufacturing. It's a transformation product of 6 ppd that may form when 6 ppd reacts. 6 ppd reacts with ozone and oxygen in the air to minimize the opportunity for those agents to attack the tire surface, which could degrade the rubber compounds and cause them to crack. So it speaks to the structural integrity of the tire. And it's the most effective protection material commercially available today. A recent report published by researchers at the University of Washington and the Washington Stormwater Center suggested a possible connection between exposure to 6 ppd quinone, the transformation product, and coho salmon mortality. Subsequent research has shown that 6-ppd quinone does not exhibit acute lethal toxicity to other salmon or freshwater aquatic species and has a comparatively low leaching potential from rubber particles in aqueous media. However, the USTMA supports further research to understand this coho salmon mortality question and the environmental pathways of 6-ppd quinone. We're actively engaged with researchers and regulators to better understand that. We're working globally with the tire industry project. We've asked California to prioritize 6 ppd in tires under their consumer safer consumer products regulations, and we are looking at an alternatives analysis, including through the UC California Berkeley Greener Solutions program. We have information on our website that could take up weeks of people's time looking at this one particular chemical question. And I alluded to this when I said we're going to keep getting questions. We're going to keep dealing with new inquiries as science advances, and no one, you won't find articles about 6-ppd or 6-ppd quinone back in the 20-teens because no one was asking those questions back then. So questions arise, and the industry has taken aggressive action to try and focus on getting sustainable answers to those as quickly as possible.
Thank you, John. And certainly, an important topic and one, that we don't have time to get into fully today, but I appreciate, hearing your perspective on how USTMA is looking at that. So
yeah, we have a lot more information on our website.
Excellent, thank you. So we've got a few more questions coming in, but I think we'll hold those to the end in the interest of time, and move on to our next speakers here from Michelin. So, to kick us off, I'd like to introduce Laure Gerbert from Michelin. And Laure, you can take it away when you're ready.
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you a few words about the targets Michelin has set, just to illustrate what John just presented and give one example in the tire industry. So the all sustainable approach was discovered in 2018 by our CEO, with the target to accelerate to meet ambitious environmental targets, as you have understood, the tire industry has an impact on the environment. The strategy is called All Sustainable because it's dedicated to create a good balance between profitable growth, like profit, planet, and people. And each and every decision that is made right now in the company is made considering the balance between the 3 Ps. So if we move to the next slide, we will see the targets. Can you move to the next? Thank you. What you can see here is targets that the company has set, except from the ones we have talked about before. The company had and still has the 30. Just to remind you of the impact of the rolling resistance for a tire, the use phase contributes to 80% of the life cycle assessment of a tire. So it's very important to keep decreasing the rolling resistance, increasing the longevity of a tire. But on the other scopes, Michelin has set very ambitious targets. So in the scope 1 and 2, the ambition is to reach carbon neutrality in all the plants worldwide by 2050 with intermediate roadmaps. So this has begun long ago. I mean, even in 2010, there already have been very, very ambitious targets with goals reached in 2022. And now the idea is to reach minus 50% in 2030 in comparison to 2010. The levers are first to avoid emissions, that's the first one, to reduce then the energy consumption, and then to shift towards renewable energies. In the scope 3, except from rolling resistance, 2 things are being made. The first one is to reduce the logistics to reach carbon neutrality as well in 2050. transport less, transport better, transport differently. Maybe you have seen the last innovation with Wizamo and new innovations enabling just to decrease the logistics impact of our industry. And the third one is about the upstream supply chain. As the company wants to reach the Paris Agreement targets, the company also demands from its suppliers that they achieve the Paris Agreement and that they have science-based targets. That's why in 2024, 70% of emissions of Michelin supplier have to be able to present science-based targets corresponding to the Paris Agreement. And here again, the aim is to reach carbon neutrality in 2050. So these are the carbon neutrality targets. And one of the major aspects to reach this target is to use what we call sustainable materials and to go to circular economy. So if you go to the next slide, exactly, you will see in detail what the company is doing to progressively implement sustainable raw materials in its tires. So with the target of having 40% of them in 2030 at corporate level and 100% in 2050. So here you can see all the components of a tire, and you can see that for each and every component of a tire, you have a solution, which either comes from industry partnerships. You see Rubberway for natural rubber, and John explained a bit about that, the work that is being done on natural rubber. And sometimes it comes from an own ecosystem created by the company or around the company. You can see here, for instance, what we just saw about pyrolysis and pyrowave, etc. So what we'll do now is to explain you how we define sustainable materials and how we will implement them in the tires progressively. So I'll leave the word to Brigitte. Brigitte?
Yes, it's okay.
Okay, great.
Okay, hello everyone and thanks, Laure. I am Brigitte Chauvin. I am the Sustainable Materials Chief Officer in Michelin Company. And maybe to start with, we can move to next slide. And I think that the first key question for all of us could be, what are we exactly talking about when talking about sustainable materials? Well, it depends because, as you know, there are nowadays no unique, well-shared definition of what sustainable materials are or are not. For Michelin, what is really at stake is to decrease as much as possible the impact on the planet of the materials used for tires. Then the first way to decrease this environmental impact is obviously to decrease the amount of material we take off the planet. And this is the sense of the R for reduce that you can see at the top of the slide. And also by design, we can ensure that the tires can be maintained in service as long as possible and are repairable or retreadable. And this is the sense of the R for reuse. And last but not least, for the manufacturing of tire, then we can use materials that are either recovered or self-renewable. And this is the R for recycle or renew. So in summary, in this context, with no universal definition of sustainable material, for Michelin, sustainable material is either recycled or renewable materials, and with no negative global environmental impact as assessed through exhaustive life cycle analysis. Then it means that we perform or ask our suppliers to perform LCA on all new materials we aim at developing. Then we can move to next slide, please. and have a look at what are the exact definition we apply for recycled and for renewable materials. Then for recycled materials, for us, it is materials that are made from feedstock generated by any recovery operation by which waste materials, both industrial and post-consumer, are reprocessed into products, materials, or substances. And this definition is an exact copy and paste of the definition given in the Waste Directive of the European Union. As far as renewable materials are concerned, this time we have chosen the definition of the OECD, the International Organization for Economic Collaboration and Development, which is also the one used by the American Chemical Society, and saying that renewable materials are made from feedstock generated from natural resources that can be replenished on a human timescale. And this key thing is indeed the definition of the time scale needed for renewal. And we can move on next slide to make just an illustration of this notion of time scale needed for renewal. This is an illustration of different kinds of natural resources, and the red dotted line materializes the human lifetime, okay? So for us, what is on the left-hand side is considered renewable, and what is on the right-hand side is considered as non-renewable. So you can see on this slide that for Michelin, silica made from river sand silicate is not considered as a sustainable material in our company, since it is not renewable on the human timescale. Next slide, please. Then now, let's move to what we call the sustainable material rate, which is abbreviated as SMR in English, or also TMD in French, taux de matière durable. And this is the KPI we have chosen to demonstrate the implementation of sustainable material throughout the whole company for all the tiles in the group. And this is really done on purpose, since our ambition is to become all sustainable. Therefore, this KPI is based on the company purchases of raw material for tiles. And it is calculated as the percentage of sustainable materials among these total purchases in 1 year. It is audited externally and published each year in the universal registration document of the company. And this KPI was 28% in 2020. It was 29% in 2021. And our commitment as a company is to be at 40% in 2030 and 100% in 2050. So, next slide, please. How do we intend to increase the sustainable material rate in our tiles? Well, once again, what matters the most for us is to decrease as much as possible the impact on the planet of our products, while, of course, continuing to offer to our customer the best performances and balance of performances. Minimizing the impact on the planet means that we assess all the environmental impacts through exhaustive life cycle analysis of our products. And increasing sustainable materials inside our products should contribute to this positive benefit. Then, if I had to say it in one word, I would say our value proposal is premium quality with sustainable material inside and improve environmental footprint. This is why eco-design is now becoming a must for each new product in the company. Then we can move to next slide, maybe to conclude with some example that is already proposed lower before. And this example is maybe a bunch of some action we are taken in the company to develop several sustainable materials. And as we want to become all sustainable, it means, of course, that we need to find solution for all the components entering the tire composition. It cannot only be one way. A diversity of approaches is required. I think maybe I will not comment all the slide, but maybe a few examples. When you see Michelin on the slide, it means that we are working directly with the suppliers. We have a lot of suppliers that are really willing to develop sustainable material, and then we take action with them. It is the case for especially metallic reinforcement or textile reinforcement. We also take action, and you can see that the synthetic rubber appears both with some solution that we are looking for on the recycle part and some solution we are looking for on the renewable part. Let's say if we take this example, it means that we have some action with pyrowave in order to recover the styrene molecule out of the depolymerization of polystyrene wastes using the technology of microwave to depolymerize these wastes of polystyrene, and then being able to recover the styrene molecule. And this is why it is on the side of a recycled material. And then we have also maybe some action on the side of renewable material. And this is typically the case with what we are doing in partnership with IFPEN and Accents to produce biobutadiene from biosource ethanol coming from biomass. In order to this time being able to access the butadiene biomolecule. And then if we combine the biobutadiene with the recycled styrene, then we can achieve a range of SBR polymer, styrene butadiene rubber, and that will be fully sustainable. And maybe I can also comment what we are doing with Carbios. Carbios is a small company, and we have met with them a first pilot plant here in Clermont-Ferrand in France. And this technology uses enzymatic degradation, and enzymatic degradation is very planet friendly since it works at both low pressure and low temperature. So it means being very frugal in terms of energy. And these enzymes that are able to degrade waste of polyesters, even colored or opaque bottles, and in order to recover the monomer, and then to be able to repolymerize and obtain the PET polymer, polyethylene terephthalate, and then being able to manufacture some fibers and then textile reinforcement that we can use in tires. So maybe I can stop here because I think it's up on the time, and I thank you very much for attention.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Bridget. So we've got several questions coming in. Maybe if I can just start with one for you, Bridget, following up on where you just left off. Looking at the use of recycled carbon black and other carbon black alternatives, are those tires that use those alternatives then able to be recycled in the same way? Is there a limit to the use of those materials in recirculation?
Yes, it won't affect the capability of the tire of being recyclable, and then it is recyclable. Then the material we will take out these tires that already use recovered carbon black or other recycled materials maybe won't be exactly the same, but we can generate new materials by recycling these tires already using recycled materials.
Great, thank you. Laura, if I could ask a question of you. So I know, Michelin is working with, a number of, customers across industries and across regions. Can you comment on, trends that you've seen in terms of, the customer demand for sustainable materials or the expectations that are being put on suppliers, to move in the direction that you've shared today?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. So we have many kinds of customers. So I will talk, I think, more of I'm in charge of passenger car tires, so I won't talk about truck, etc., mining. So what I can notice is that car makers are really now asking for it. Like car makers are really now defining specifications on this, and I'm sure that there are companies in the room that know about that, with like minimum threshold of share of sustainable materials. And here again, definitions can vary. So it's very important to always talk and share about what we intend with sustainable materials, because there is a big responsibility in like using this indicator, as Brigitte explained. We have consumers having different attitudes all over the world, actually, different kind of consumers. What I can notice, I don't know if the attendants will share this point, is that consumers have different reactions depending on what you tell them. If you just talk about sustainable materials, I'm not sure many consumers will understand what it means and what it takes. But if you start talking about plastics, textiles, if you start talking about materials and what they mean or the impact on the ocean, they will have a better understanding and then be interested in having solutions that contain these solutions. And I would say we have fleets, like passenger cars fleets now. I would say having to demonstrate that they use environmental solutions and considering sustainable materials in this equation.
Great,
so it's
thank you,
really
Laura.
becoming a topic, and it happened very fast. I think it happened very fast because because people get, I think, more and more knowledgeable about like fossil resources, impact of materials. So I guess it will accelerate.
Thank you. Bridget, maybe following up on that, that emerging trend, or the increased expectation here, based on your experience working, on those projects you just shared, what have you seen as some of the biggest barriers, to preventing suppliers for, moving in this direction or making more progress in terms of implementing sustainable materials?
Okay, Kilian, please, can you repeat the beginning of the question? I think the quality of the sound was not good enough for me.
Yeah, sure. So my question is, based on your experience on, the projects that you've shared, what you've seen as some of the biggest barriers to implementing sustainable materials, or what prevents, some of these projects from being able to move forward today?
Okay. I think that all cases are met. It's some technology are very poor in maturity, but what we have found, and I think that since even only 1 year ago, the progress of the different technology has achieved a lot of progress. So it means that we are confident that we will have the opportunity to make almost all the projects I have shown successful. It will just be a matter of time, and this is why we have a roadmap. And we have also this crossing point of 40% of sustainable material rate in 2030, because we are pretty confident that we can succeed at that time to make this progress, this project successful, and then prepare the future for the rest of the time until 2050.
Thank you. There's a question here about, governmental pressures for, sustainable materials. And I would, open this up to, to John, Laura, or Bridget. Can you comment on, sort of the government drivers for making change in this area?
This is John Sharon. I can comment on this a little bit. In the United States, For example, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act does have references to sustainability. I mean, it's a massive bill, but it has references to centers of excellence for for sustainable asphalt or pavement technologies and for stormwater and the like. I think we're seeing more work and research and activity by the federal government in this area, not really speaking to product per se, but just in general. But it has not reached the level of legislation or regulation.
Laura, Bridget, are you seeing the same thing from the European side, or anything to add there?
Maybe what we can add is that first, the tire industry has to agree on a common definition. So the tire industry project is working on it. And secondly, I guess we'll have regional, like a difference between regions, like different visions depending on regions, and that it will take time before we get to a global regulation. But Brigitte, I let you extend my answer.
Yes, I think that really the key question is making the link between either renewable or recycled material and sustainable material, and then it may take some time until we find an agreement and we can align of the criteria we take into account and we consider as significant enough, and on which we can agree to make this definition of a sustainable material. Okay, but this is why we are working, and we have currently an action running with the TIP. And the first step will, step by step, okay, we will start to align on the definition of renewable material and trying to agree on this notion of a time scale for renewal and recycled material. And after that, in the second time, it will be to try to find a way to shift from recycled material or renewable material to the qualification of sustainable material.
Thank you. And I see we've got just a minute left. So just as a closing question here briefly, I'd like to come back to where we started in terms of this being the opening of a conversation and an opportunity for further collaboration and alignment. And so with that, we put it, both to USTMA and to Michelin, any comments on, the support or the engagement that you would hope to see going forward from, your industry partners in terms of the sustainability visions that you both shared? Maybe, John, if I can start with you in terms of opportunities for industry engagement with USTMA's work.
Our vision right now has a lot to do with platforms and partnerships. We're not going to solve these problems alone in a vacuum, and we need to work with a lot of other stakeholders to make sure that all the scrap tires generated make it into end-use markets, and to achieve the other visions, the other 5 visions that we've identified. So we're seeing a lot more collaboration in our future, and we know we would like to have, for example, 2 rubber modified asphalt workshops late in the fall, and we would also like to have a workshop that focuses, again, in a deep dive kind of way, on molded and extruded materials in the automotive industry, looking at how the automotive industry could use recycled rubber. One of the things about sustainability is that it's got to work for everybody, and the product and its performance has to make sense. In the rubber modified asphalt side of things, for example, pavement engineers say, don't put your garbage in my road. We don't want linear landfills, and we agree with that completely. But rubber makes roads better. It's as a mix additive, so it makes a lot of sense, both from a performance and from an economic and from an environmental perspective. I think there's those kinds of opportunities with automotive companies to take ground tire rubber and other tire-derived products and circle them back into new tires And I also think there's opportunity to work together with the automotive industry, who also is very concerned about the roads in this country. So I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity for collaboration.
And thank you, John. And Laura and Bridget, I'd like to just give you the opportunity here for a final word before we close.
Yes, to me, collaboration is key because the challenge is so huge that I mean, each tire player cannot manage the whole tire issue by himself, and the tire industry itself cannot solve the automotive industry issues. So we'll have to collaborate within the tire industry. I'm thinking of natural rubber. I don't know if you know that tires account for 70% of the natural rubber use. So we have a responsibility here. End-of-life tires, as mentioned, sharing solutions to recover the tires at the end of the life, etc. And I think another key point will be, together with the automotive industry, find the right balance between using sustainable materials and optimizing the life cycle assessment of a vehicle. Because in the end, if you just ask for more renewable materials, but you decrease the LCA performance, maybe you don't make the best decisions. So agree on ways to make the right decisions for the planet in the end. So I guess collaboration is like a must-have. It's a no-brainer. Yeah. Brigitte?
Yes, I fully agree with what you have said, Laura. So I will join my mind on what you said, and I just will add that another key point will be to be open enough to all together, not forget that we are doing all that just to preserve environment and for the nature, and then to assume that we are not taking off the nature more resources than she can give. And as everyone and every businesses will move to sustainable material, then I think that the time will come when we will have to have this collaboration even more reinforced, since there is always the base case for the environment, the best case for profit, and the best case for people. And then our challenge for all together will be to find the best compromise and the best trade-off while developing sustainable materials. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you all. And of course, we fully agree and look forward to continuing this dialogue and finding those opportunities for collaboration to optimize impact across industries. So just a quick reminder, there's been several questions. We will send out a copy of this recording and the slide deck for everyone in the next day or two. And would also encourage you to check out Suppliers Partnership's website. We've put together some resources from the automotive industry's perspective on things like recycled content and renewable materials that may be a useful resource to you following on this conversation. So with that, I want to thank John, Laura, and Bridget again for your excellent presentations. And we'll close the webinar at this point, but look forward to continuing the dialogue into the future. So thank you, everyone.